It's 1946. The United States is recovering from a terrible economic crisis and the Second World War. Morale is low among the people, tensions are high as the USSR stirs up trouble, and nobody is really sure what direction fate is going to take the country in. The government, in its wisdom, decides to pile a load of important historical American documents and artifacts onto a train along with some good old depictions of the American dream, and tour it around the country as a mobile museum to stir up some American spirit. Dubbed the Freedom Train, the service ran between 1947 and 1949, and was a moderate success, but many people were critical of it, pointing out its lack of acknowledgement of both Native and Black American history and its narrow definitions of what made a good citizen, with many dismissing it as a propaganda machine. While the overall impact of the train was a net positive, in the long term it only served to bolster the doubts of those who were already skeptical of the country's future. The Freedom Train had the potential to be great, but it needed that little extra something if it was ever going to make history. It's May 1969. The United States is recovering from a terrible economic crisis and the Vietnam War. Morale is low among the people, tensions are high as the USSR stirs up trouble, and nobody is really sure what direction fate is going to take the country in. There were some who were making the most of things, however. New York businessman Ross Rowland Jr. was living out his dreams of running steam excursions across the country, having restored Nickel Plate Road No. 759 back into working order and using it to pull the Golden Spike Centennial Limited to mark the 100th anniversary of the Golden Spike ceremony, the event that signified the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. It's while running this excursion service Rowland rubbed shoulders with fellow train enthusiast John Wayne, who was helping promote the event. While discussing the Gold Spike celebrations, Wayne mentioned how the country's bicentennial anniversary was only a few years away, and how nice it would be to run a similar kind of service around the country to celebrate the occasion. After all, it was the railroads that practically helped build the foundations of the United States. It seemed only fitting that a railroad be used to celebrate its 200th anniversary. Rowland found out not long after that the government didn't have anything big officially planned for the celebrations, so he approached the appropriate authorities with a proposal to run a train service from state to state which would act as a mobile museum of American history, similar to the first Freedom Train. He did get permission from the government to run the train, but no financial backing, meaning he'd have to pay out of his own pocket. Of course, he alone didn't have the money to do this, so it was time for Plan B. Rather than pray the government would change its mind and fork over the required funds, he was going to do it the American way, by turning to private businesses for capital. The American Freedom Train Foundation was established in October 1972, and with a briefcase full of concept art, plans, a smile on his face and his head held high, Rowland began pitching the idea to various businesses all across the country in the hopes someone would be willing to sponsor the event. They said no. So he tried another company. They also said no. And so did the next one, and the next one, and the one after that, and the one after that. By 1973, Rowland had been turned down by 54 different companies over the span of 2 years. He didn't want huge logos and product placement covering the train, which made it a tough sell to many companies. With the anniversary getting closer and closer by the day, things weren't looking too good for this whole Freedom Train thing. Rowland wasn't going to give up, but if he was going to get this train moving, he was going to need a miracle. A hero to come to his aid. Perhaps someone who embodied the American spirit, who was renowned for saving people. Someone who is known to wear blue. Someone like... As luck would have it, Rowland met Ralph Weisinger, who happened to have a friend in a high place at Pepsi. After pulling some strings, Rowland got the chance to pitch the Freedom Train to Don Kendall, the chairman of PepsiCo, who seemed to really like the idea. So much so that by the end of the day, Kendall pledged to give $1 million to support Rowland's endeavour and helped reach out to other companies for their support, resulting in another $1 million each from General Motors, Prudential Insurance, Kraft Food, and the Atlantic Richfield Company. He also reached out to then-President Richard Nixon, who, with the influence of Kendall and several celebrities that John Wayne had convinced to join in, gave the AFT Foundation full access to everything in the Federal Archives, the Library of Congress, and the Smithsonian. With over $5 million to spend and access to the exhibits the Freedom Train needed, it was time to put this crazy train together. The big question was how to display the contents of the Freedom Train. Loading a bunch of American heirlooms into a few boxcars and driving them around town wasn't exactly befitting such an occasion, so the team set about making some more suitable mobile exhibit halls, with plans coming from designer Barry Howard. 12 baggage cars formerly belonging to the New York Central Railroad were purchased to be modified into exhibit halls. The idea being visitors would start at one end of the train and work their way down from car to car. An additional 2 New York baggage cars were converted into showcases that carried several larger items, both being fitted with large windows allowing visitors to see the exhibits from the outside. Baggage cars alone weren't going to be enough. There also came the matter of transporting the rest of the infrastructure needed to properly run the displays. 3 flatbeds were leased for use by the AFT Foundation to carry around the 10 different wagons that served a multitude of different purposes, such as being mini offices, storage for ramps and electrical equipment, or simply for selling tickets, concessions, food and souvenirs. The flatbeds also carried several trucks, vans and a forklift from stop to stop, these being used to load and unload the cars, move equipment around and other miscellaneous jobs. While the displays were being readied, a small train made up of 4 former Reading Company carriages was put together and set off in June 1974 around all 48 contiguous states, stopping in various towns and cities. Known as the Preamble Express, its job was to help figure out an ideal route for the Freedom Train to take, as well as figure out which cities and towns to stop at. On top of that, meetings were held aboard to help fill in local community leaders on what the Freedom Train was and how to best prepare for its visit. Meetings usually involved sitting through a film titled All Aboard America, listening to the song Here Comes the Freedom Train written for the event and sung by Porter Wagner and Dolly Parton, followed by a meal in the dining car. The service was initially pulled by Delaware and Hudson 2312 built by General Electric, but this was swapped out for Union Pacific 951, which was built by General Motors, a much better fit for the role since General Motors was one of the major sponsors of the event. This, however, raised another question. What locomotive should be used to pull the Freedom Train itself? The obvious choice was a steam engine. Modern diesels were flashy and much easier to operate, but the romance of steam power was simply unmatched, and so it was decided a suitable locomotive would be found to head the train. There were a few candidates, but none in working order that met the AFT's needs. Attention was then turned to what locomotives could be restored in time, and eventually the team settled on Southern Pacific GS4 4449. Being the head of the Coast Daylight Service, it was one of the West's most iconic looking engines. Its streamlining combined with the fact it was built in 1941, making it pretty young for a steam engine, and its ability to pull heavy trains long distances at speed made it the perfect candidate. The only issue was it had been on static display outdoors near Oak Park in Oregon for the last 16 years. Not only had the weather been unkind to it, but some locals had vandalized it and stolen many smaller parts such as its builder's plates and whistle. It's likely 4449 would have been left where it was until the AFT team evaluating the engine found the rods and bearings in surprisingly good condition. It turned out that ever since it was put on display, a Southern Pacific employee by the name of Jack Holst regularly oiled the engine just in case it'd ever move again, along with 2 other engines also on static display. Holst tragically died in 1972 at the age of 38, meaning he never got to see his dream come to fruition. His work, however, was not in vain. Because of the excellent condition of the bearings and rods, 4449 was deemed viable for restoration, and in December 1974 was moved to a roundhouse in Portland for repairs. Elsewhere across the country, the rest of the train was taking shape. The 12 cars that made up the main attraction were numbered 100 to 111, with each having its own theme. The first was simply known as the control car. It acted as the main entrance and security for the rest of the train while giving passengers the chance to acclimate to the dark before moving on. Next was the beginning, which documented the country's early days establishing itself and its independence. Following that was exploration and expansion, which related to the endeavours made to explore the land. Then growth of the nation, which related to learning and traversing the country. Followed by Origins, which explored the native, European, African, Hispanic and Asian origins of the population. Innovations was next, showcasing many American inventions, followed by Human Resources, which held examples of individual achievements and craftsmanship. Afterwards was Sports, which housed various sporting memorabilia. Then Performing Arts, which displayed artifacts relating to film, radio, television and theatre, and Fine Arts after that, showcasing more traditional art pieces such as paintings and sculptures. The final display car was Conflict and Resolution, which covered various trials and tribulations the country went through, from the Civil War to the World Wars to the Civil Rights movements. Lastly was the Exit car, which does what it says on the label. It also contained a large generator to help provide electricity to the rest of the train. Not only were these cars fitted with display cases, but the floors had moving walkways installed to help usher visitors along, and sound units which would play a narration to accompany the exhibits. The two showcase cars were numbered 40 and 41, and between them carried a model of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad's Arabian steam locomotive, the Friendship fire engine, a 1904 Oldsmobile, a Lunar Rover test unit, a replica of the Liberty Bell, and a map showcasing the Freedom Train's journey. The other exhibition cars also had showcase windows on their outsides too, allowing for the train to slow down at certain destinations so people could see the displays as the train went by. Along with these and the flatbeds, the 4 cars that made up the Preamble Express were also to be attached to the train along with another sleeper car and a generator car. The big day approached and the train was ready to go. The locomotive to pull it, however, wasn't. By March of 1975, progress on 4449's restoration had come a long way, but had fallen behind schedule. The train was due to start its tour on the 1st of April, and in its current state was unlikely to be ready. The AFT Foundation had come to terms with the delay, and knowing that some states would require a diesel or electric engine to tow the train anyway, didn't mind the idea of a diesel heading the service for the first few weeks. Ross Rowland, however, did very much mind, and being the passionate and committed man he was, he made a bold executive decision. Restore another engine. While the crew in Oregon toiled away getting 4449 ready, Rowland turned his attention to Baltimore, where Reading T1 locomotives 2100 and 2101 were kept in storage. Having the same 484 wheel arrangement as 4449 and being roughly the same size, they were the next best thing available. Rowland purchased both engines in late February, choosing to restore 2101 as it was in better mechanical condition while using 2100 as a source of parts. Engineers worked around the clock to get 2101 back into working order, and just 30 days later, on the 28th of March, it was back in steam. Work on the engine was so rushed that the paint on its wheels was still wet when it set off to collect the train. It was renumbered AFT number 1 for the occasion, and while it sounds like an insane move on Rowland's behalf, which it was, he had other motives besides covering for 4449's delayed restoration. The first part of the tour would mostly involve travelling the northeastern states, many of which had weight and size restrictions that meant 4449 wouldn't have been able to pull the train there anyway. Not only did restoring 2101 mean that the service could start with a steam locomotive as intended, it also meant a steam locomotive could be used on certain parts of the journey that might have otherwise had to resort to a diesel or electric engine instead. With an engine to pull it, the final checks were made before the American Freedom Train hit the rails. As well as the engine crew and concession workers, staff also included security and the presence of the honor guard to help keep an eye on some of the treasures loaded onto the train. Among them were such items as George Washington's copy of the Constitution, the first Bible printed in America, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s pulpit and robes, replica of Jesse Owens' Olympic gold medals, Native American artifacts, several of Thomas Edison's inventions, various medals, Judy Garland's dress from The Wizard of Oz, the Emancipation Proclamation, the Louisiana Purchase, and an actual rock from the moon. Everything was looking perfect, until the train caught fire. One of the power cars caught fire during a press tour which threatened the safety of many of the artifacts on board. Fortunately, the fire was dealt with quickly and the fault was put right in time for the service to begin. On the 1st of April, the train pulled into Delaware Park, signifying the beginning of its long journey across the states. Hopefully without any mishaps. With its paint now dry, 2101 set off from Delaware and made its way to Albany, New York, followed by Burlington, Vermont, Manchester, New Hampshire, Portland, Maine, Boston, Lowell and Worcester, Massachusetts, and Rochester, New York before arriving in Ohio in May, where it travelled between Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati and Archibald until mid-June. During this time, work on 4449 was completed. The engine spent a few days on display in California before setting off to meet with the Freedom Train over in the east. 2101 meanwhile was given a new coat of paint more fitting with the rest of the train. Wayne, Indiana was next on the list of destinations. Then Detroit, Grand Rapids and Kalamazoo, Michigan, South Bend, Indiana and on to Illinois where it stopped at Peoria, Springfield and Chicago. It's in Chicago 4449 met up with 2101 and took over pulling the train, though not without injury. While passing through Nebraska, a dump truck partially reversed onto the tracks as 4449 approached, causing the engine to clip the tail of the truck. Nobody was hurt, but 4449 had to make an emergency repair stop to get the side skirting on the fireman's side replaced. Once in Chicago, a ceremony was held to mark the passing of the torch from 2101 to 4449, and on the 4th of August, 4449 set off to tour the rest of the state while 2101 was given some much-needed rest and TLC. After passing through Crystal Lake, Rockford and Aurora, the train travelled to Green Bay and Madison, Wisconsin, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Fargo, North Dakota, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Sioux City and West Des Moines, Iowa before stopping in Omaha, Nebraska. 4449 needed to make a stop at the Union Pacific's Omaha shops to correct the contour on its driving wheels. Diesels were provided by the Burlington Northern Railroad to help cover the journey while 4449 was out of commission, but it was still a setback nonetheless. The Freedom Train was diesel-hauled through Colorado Springs, Colorado, Cheyenne, Wyoming, and Billings, Montana before 4449 was able to take over again, carrying on to Salt Lake City and Ogden, Utah, Boise, Idaho, Spokane, Seattle, and Tacoma, Washington, Portland, Salem, and Springfield, Oregon, and Reno, Nevada before arriving in California in late November, where it stayed until January the following year. Highlights from this leg of the journey included a visit from Soviet cosmonauts, a group of Canadian enthusiasts visiting with a Royal Hudson, and Mike Love of the Beach Boys giving a live concert. While in California, the Freedom Train and its crew travelled between Sacramento, Stockton, Oakland, San Francisco, San Jose, Fresno, Pomona, Santa Barbara, Long Beach, Anaheim, San Diego, and San Juan Capistrano, celebrating Christmas too by sticking a great big Santa face on the locomotive. They'd reached the halfway point of their journey. Upon initially hearing news of the Freedom Train, many Texan railroad enthusiasts expressed their desire to see the train pulled by a Texan locomotive. Texas pride meant some colourful, namby-pamby, streamlined Californian engine had no place pulling the Freedom Train on Texas rails, and so the 610 Foundation used this as an opportunity to achieve their goal of getting Texas and Pacific Engine 610 restored. A deal was made with the AFT Foundation that should 610 be restored in time, it would be allowed to pull the train through Texas and possibly other neighbouring states. The engine was already at the Fort Worth Army Depot while decisions were being made on what to do with it. So once the money was raised, it was only a simple matter of shunting it to the Fort Worth stockyard area for repairs to begin. Work began in February 1975, and by October the boiler was in working order. Around 3,000 custom-made parts had to be produced in order to complete the locomotive, something that took much longer than anticipated. As a result, 610 didn't move under its own steam until late January 1976. During a test run on the 4th of February, the locomotive suffered a fault in one of its bearings and had to be quickly repaired. It was good to go by the 7th, and the plan was for 610 to take over the train in Odessa on the 9th, meaning they managed to get the engine working just in the nick of time. At the last minute, however, the schedule was altered so that the exchange would instead take place in Austin on the 15th, meaning 610 didn't get the chance to carry the train entirely through Texas as planned. Despite the setbacks, they still did it, making 610 the third steam locomotive to haul the bicentennial special. While 610 was in the last stages of its restoration, 4449 was gearing up to start the journey back to the east. It left California and moved on to Arizona by the 22nd of January, stopping at Yuma, Tempe, and Tucson before making a right turn at Albuquerque, New Mexico, and arriving in Texas. 4449 took the train to Odessa and San Antonio before stopping in Austin, where 610 took over. From there, 610 got to take the train to Houston, Fort Worth, and Dallas before handing it back to 4449, which carried on to Wichita Falls. Up next was Oklahoma City and Tulsa in Oklahoma, followed by Wichita, Topeka, and Kansas City in Kansas. It's while in Kansas the train received its 4 millionth visitor, and at its next stop in Jefferson City, Missouri, it celebrated 1 full year touring the rails of the US. After St. Louis, it went to Little Rock, Arkansas, Memphis, Tennessee, Jackson, Mississippi, Baton Rouge and New Orleans, Louisiana, Mobile, Alabama, Columbus and Atlanta, Georgia, before heading back to Alabama where 4449 stopped at Birmingham. 2101 had been repainted and repaired and was waiting to take over the East Coast run for the next few months while 4449 was serviced. After the exchange, 2101 carried on to Huntsville, stopping at Knoxville and Chattanooga, Tennessee, Lexington, Kentucky, Evansville, Indiana, Dayton, Ohio, Huntington and South Charleston, West Virginia, Cumberland, Maryland, Harrisburg, Pittsburgh, Brackenridge and Williamsport, Pennsylvania, Binghamton, New York, Scranton, Pennsylvania, Morristown, New Jersey, New York, Milford, Connecticut, and Providence, Rhode Island, where the service had to stop and wait out Hurricane Belle before continuing on. New London and Meriden, Connecticut were next, then Tarrytown, New York, Newark and Brunswick, New Jersey, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, Trenton, Asbury Park and Atlantic City, New Jersey, King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, Baltimore and Hagerstown, Maryland, and a long stop at Washington, D.C. While in Washington, the staff of the train got a tour of the White House and 4449 caught up to take over pulling the train for the last leg of the run. Setting off for Virginia, they stopped at Norfolk, Richmond, Fredericksburg and Danville before moving on to Greensboro, Charlotte and Raleigh, North Carolina, Greenville, Columbia, Florence and Charleston, South Carolina, Savannah, Georgia, and finally entering Florida in mid-November where the train traveled to Jacksonville, Tallahassee, Gainesville, Orlando, Sarasota, St. Petersburg, Lakeland, West Palm Beach, and finally Miami. With that, 1976 came to a close, and so too did the Freedom Train. In total, the train travelled 25,833 miles and visited 138 cities over the span of 21 months, racking up over 7 million visitors. There were still those who complained about the train, calling it pro-war or pro-corporate, but the main issue people had was that they only got to spend 15 minutes on board after queuing for hours. For many, it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see firsthand some of the great artifacts of their country. Not only did everyday tourists visit the train, but teachers and countless other educators were encouraged to take their classes to see it. People of all races, creeds and ages lined up for hours to see it, and nearly all were thrilled to have had the experience. Roland admitted none of it would have been possible without the dedicated work of the staff and crew, most of which were college students who wanted to be part of the cause. There was a relatively high employee turnover on account of the awkward living conditions, going from hotel to train town to town, but there were still a few people who stuck around from beginning to end. It was a miracle that all 512 artifacts on board remained unscathed too. In the end, the American Freedom Train had been a rousing success. The only question remained, what now? With the journey over, Roland was left with a load of locomotives and carriages that he had no idea what to do with. The exhibits were naturally returned to their rightful owners, while any borrowed rolling stock was also repainted and returned. What happened to the display cars isn't really known, since they'd been completely gutted in the process of converting them into museum cars, making them little use outside of being mobile displays. The two showcase cars ended up in Las Vegas before being scrapped in the mid-90s, while some of the former Reading cars that carried the staff ended up scattered around Canada. The locomotives, meanwhile, all had mixed fates. 2101 perhaps suffered the worst. It headed several excursion trains on the chassis system until 1979, when it was badly burned in a roundhouse fire. Most of the damage was just cosmetic, but it was enough to end 2101's career. Roland, who still owned the engine, negotiated with the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Museum and gave it to them in exchange for Chesapeake and Ohio 614. 2101 was repainted into its Freedom Train livery and given the number 1, and has remained on display ever since. Now that 610 was back in working order, its owners could live out their dreams of using it to pull special excursion services. Alas, 610 didn't feel the same way. It suffered from numerous mechanical issues all throughout 1977, and by 1978 the railroad simply grew sick of it constantly breaking down. It was put to one side and eventually donated to the Texas State Railroad in 1986, where it still remains on display to this day. 4449, on the other hand, had an entirely new lease on life. After the Freedom Train, it was repainted back into its daylight livery and had a long life pulling excursion trains and attending special events, such as Rail Fair 81 and 91, the World Fair in Vancouver, and even starring in the movie Tough Guys. It remained one of the most prominent steam locomotives in operation on the West Coast. It's still operational to this day, though it doesn't run mainline services as much as it used to. And all of these years of service are thanks to the commitment of one man who kept it oiled and maintained, just to have a chance of seeing it run once more. It's 2026, the United States is recovering from a terrible economic crisis, and the insert current war. Morale is low among the people, tensions are high as Russia stirs up trouble, and nobody is really sure what direction fate is going to take the country in. With America's 250th birthday coming up, the idea of running another Freedom Train has been put into motion. Roland envisioned running another Freedom Train from 2023 to 2026. This time with more exhibits, interactive displays, an IMAX experience, and a 4-acre showground. Proceeds would go towards veterans charities, Chesapeake and Ohio 614 would pull it, and the whole thing would be on the road for 36 months. Lack of funds and difficulty cooperating with the railroads and government has greatly impacted the project, and Roland's death in 2025 seems to have been the final nail in the coffin. It was announced earlier this year that Union Pacific Big Boy 4014 would be travelling east to celebrate the 4th of July in Philadelphia, but this trip is explicitly said to be unrelated to the Freedom Train. As it stands, it's likely there won't be another proper Freedom Train for quite some time. But who knows? Maybe in 50 years' time, another train will come along and help reunite the nation. Maybe Pepsi Man will show up and save the day. Or maybe the whole thing is just a wash. For now, let's take a look back at the American Freedom Train and how so many people helped defy the odds to make it a reality. For me at least, it's taught me a few things. That through teamwork, loyalty and dedication, you can do anything that you put your heart into. And no matter how hopeless the odds are, holding on to a dream can help make it real. If not for yourself, then those who follow in your footsteps.